Hello, WHYY viewers and Latin jazz lovers. You are in for a special treat as we discuss this wonderful film that you just saw, The Roots of Latin Jazz, starring Tony Succar, Pablo Gil, and with host Shelia E. My name is Rasan Lucas. I am creative producer and partner at Afro Taino here in Philadelphia, a great company that celebrates the sights and sounds of the diaspora. I'm joining here today some special people on this talkback. I'd like to introduce you all to Jesse Bermudez. He is producer and founder of AMLA. Now, I know it's a long name, Jesse. You can run it through there. Asociación Músicos Latinoamérica.
You got it right. Asociación de Músicos Latinoamericanos.
There we go. All right. Thank you for joining us. All right. And also with Jesse here, we have another esteemed person here. This guy is not just a musical adventurer, but he is a master percussionist who has played all over the globe with luminaries like Kirk Franklin, Alicia Keys, and Her, and so many more. I'd like to introduce Pablo Batista.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
And today, gentlemen, we are going to be discussing this wonderful film we just saw, The Roots of Latin Jazz. And of course, what better than to have such deeply well knowledgeable people like yourselves who know the ins and outs of Latin jazz, of Latin music, and the history and the legacy of it. I'd like to dive in. Is there, off the bat, are there any comments that you have about this film and what you would like the viewers, WHYY viewers, to know about
it? I'm sorry. Do we get okay? Then I'll start with it. And my comment that I'll start with is Afro-Cuban jazz is the earliest form of Latin jazz. So in my mind, I was assuming that some of that music, like say from one of the most exciting groups in Cuba, educator, might have been part of that first presentation in Cuba.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And educator is a very prominent band, of course, throughout the whole legacy.
Well, Paquito de Rivera and also Arturo Sandoval used to be part of that. They came to the U.S. and are very successful.
Pablo, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I believe, you know, after watching the film, I really enjoyed it. It was an amazing production. I enjoyed, I'm a big Shelia E fan and Tony Succar, and I knew a lot of the members of the band that he put together. I really enjoyed the film. I thought it was really well done. I did notice that there were some gaps in it, and because of probably the nature and the timing. There's, you know, it's a short documentary, so it's hard to cover the whole gamut of the whole world of history of Latin jazz. But I did notice that, you know, beginnings of Latin jazz, some of those things were not included, like Jesse just mentioned. Bebo Valdez, who was the father of Chucho Valdez, you know, these guys have a long tradition of incorporating jazz melodies, harmonies, and elements of jazz. Chucho and I know was a big fan of Oscar Peterson, Art Tatum, and really esteemed pianists like that. So he, you know, you can tell that he's spent his, you know, entire, you know, or a large part of his life studying all the genres of African music and as well as jazz in the United States, and you can hear it in his playing. So that was one of the things that stood out to me, first of all, and because of the influence of educator, they were a Grammy Award-winning you know, band from Cuba, which is like, and their legacies started in the 70s and 60s. So I just felt that you know, that would have been a really a good place to include or make them inclusive of the film as well. And so, you know, that's one of the things that stood out immediately. and then as we move on into New York City, I felt that there should have been a little emphasis put on people like Machito and Graciela and Chano Pozo and Dizzy, and who, Dizzy Gillespie brought Chano Pozo over and in the 50s, and they wrote one of the most famous Latin jazz songs called Manteca. So, those things I felt might have been a good thing to mention as well. And just many, many more that I feel like, well, not many more, but a few other people like Tito Puente, who's had over 120 records, and a few other people that I thought should have been included.
I'd just like to add to that, Pablo, because I just want to mention that with the Machito Orchestra, Mario Bauza wrote the first Latin jazz tune in Harlem, and it was called Tanga in 1942. And from then on, it began to continue to evolve in New York and Harlem.
Now that was really insightful, guys. And it's on the inside. I feel like the music kid in me is just rolling around in laughter listening to you guys, because this is just so much education. This is everything that WHYY viewers could really glean from and learn more about this. And as Pablo said earlier, there's a lot to condense in under an hour for this film. However, I feel that Tony Succar and Pablo Gil and Shelia E, of course, who we all champion her, we love her. I think they did a pretty good job at striving for the excellence and the quality of musicianship that is prevalent throughout Latin jazz. And of course, it's always about reaching higher into the rafters of quality sound and jazz, of course, that experimentation. But before we go deep into this, before we dive into the first number, which is actually taken from Pablo's cue, starting with the fusion of Cuba and in Harlem. Before we go into this, I'd like to talk more about how this panel came into fruition. First off, this is the talkback for Roots of Latin Jazz, the film you just saw on WHYY. And this was brought with a partnership between WHYY and Afro Taino. Also, this event was made possible by the Wyncote Foundation and the Latino Public Broadcasting. So we give much applause and appreciation to them. Now, without further ado, let's dive deeper into this conversation. Now, the first number of this presentation of this film takes place with the fusion of Cuba's music and the influence of Harlem as a backdrop, that hard bop era. They chose to cover the song Eye of the Hurricane by Herbie Hancock, which I feel is very fitting. I saw just the full big band jazz element in full glory. And I felt it was a great representation just to hone in on what true jazz is, right?
I agree with you. Herbie Hancock, he's an icon, Watermelon Man. And actually, it's an interesting, real quick point. Herbie's song Watermelon Man was written, but it was popularized by another great Cuban percussionist, Mongo Santa Maria, which, so, that's another thing that, there's a nice little tie in there. So I just
another tidbit on that was that I remember Herbie saying that when he gave that song to Mongo, he didn't even know what a montuno was.
No, he was subbing for Mongo. He came in as a sub for a piano. Mongo's piano player couldn't make it, and they recommended this young guy Herbie, and then he pulled out one of his charts, was the Watermelon Man, and Mongo loved it, and that's when the next day they went and recorded it, and boom, it was a huge hit. So.
Now Mongo, he's had such a trajectory himself. Not just with the jazz scene of riding through on the Cuban jazz scene, the Cuban in the United States, in New York jazz scene rather, but also he's very well celebrated by the salsa world for his work with the Fania All-Stars and those type of collaborations as well.
He was very, very, very kind of like, he had rhythms that weren't even recorded, because he was he was somewhere else, I guess. He was a beautiful person, and his playing is unbelievable. And I remember talking to Marty Scheller, who played with Mongo, and what he told me was he couldn't believe that they would play every night, and then Mongo would play his heart out every single night.
Hmm. Now, if Mongo was still with us today, I'm sure he'd be giving Pablo a run for his money. Is that correct, Pablo?
If he was alive, I think I may give him a run for his money.
There you go.
I
That's
think-
spoken like a true warrior out there on the drums. Nice, nice.
But he was a
So-
big influence on me as well.
Oh, absolutely. And in fact, I would go a little bit further and say that Mongo is quite, how do you say it? There is really not much of a parallel to him when it comes to the percussion. I know there are many out there, and everybody has their own signature style, but Mongo is just, he was a walking encyclopedia of those rhythms, I felt.
I'd like to mention that also a person that should be noted, and he just passed recently, is an amazing percussionist that by the name of Candido, who was in New York since almost at the same time Chano came over. So, and he's kind of underrated, but Candido was a pioneer and an icon for a lot of us percussionists and as well. So.
And he was the first percussionist to be in Hollywood in these big productions. He was just a fascinating person.
Yeah, I got the luck to witness Candido live in Philadelphia some years ago. And I just remember how he was on tour with the Conga Kings with Giovanni Hidalgo and everybody. And I felt that he had such a language that would come across in his playing. Not only were his drums so melodically tuned to just basically sing, but his playing was so crisp and so formulaic in a way where it felt like it took many years to keep something so perfect and simple.
Yeah.
Some people like to come out and play a lot, but he played it quite simple and straight to the point, and it was so clean and crisp.
And he started with just one drum. That's how he started. And then he began to create these sounds that it was like
more drums,
conversing.
And then he incorporated more drums as time went on.
Yeah, definitely. Afterwards.
2 and 3 and 4, yeah. So, okay.
On that note, taking a cue from the drums, we're going to go to the next number of this film, where they transfer this whole Latin jazz voyage over to Porto Alegre, Brazil. And they take on Afro-Brazilian samba and bring in so many instruments that are really indigenous to the Afro-Brazilian culture, like the berimbau and the surdo and the pandero. And I remember earlier, before this actual conversation, we had a little sit down just to basically touch base. And I know that we were really, we had some opinions about how a standard like Mas Que Nada and also certain luminaries of Brazilian music could have been spotlighted in this. And again, we're not here to, criticize the filmmakers in any way. If anything, we're here to inform the WHYY viewership a little bit more deeper into the world of Latin jazz. And of course, who better than two experts here on this panel? With Mas Que Nada, a very popular standard Brazilian music, I felt that they kept it really clean right down the middle. But any words on that? I felt like maybe it could have been some variation. Maybe it could have been some, I don't know, maybe kept it really simple, because some of those songs come to maybe 2.5 minutes and that's it. I know they really expanded a bit for the musicians.
I think that, in terms of the incorporation, inclusion, I would have liked to possibly seen a few other people like Sergio Mendes, because he has a huge influence in Brazilian Latin jazz in the United States with all his groups, Brazil 66 or whatever, all the way on up And he's had so many amazing musicians that came out of there as well. That was an institution as well. Kind of like Art Blakey and the Jazz Messengers, so many amazing people. Or in our Latin music, Manny Oquendo and Conjunto Libre. It was these guys were institutions where all these amazing musicians came through. It was like a university. So Sergio was one of those pioneers as well, and there are probably many others. But again, Brazil is so huge, and there's so many different styles of Brazilian music, and so many different rhythms. So it's I think they did an amazing job in trying to identify great songs and include them, because it's each one of these countries is an hour or two or three within themselves. So I think they did.
I'd like to add a little bit to that. And the first thing I like to say is I really enjoyed the episode. Believe me, I really enjoyed it. But also, like anything else, I keep looking at different things. And one of the things that I was surprised about the Brazilian episode was that if you listen at the end, they went with samba with salsa, which, I was surprised, to hear that. It was very well done, and the energy picks up, but it was a combination of samba and salsa.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Pablo. What were you going to say?
that's quite a melting pot, and that's what's also happening though in Latin jazz. People are fusing different styles or genres of Latin jazz and putting a little bit. And it's been done a lot in to be honest with you, it's been done a lot in salsa. Sonora Ponceña, Papo Luca, he would put little pieces of samba in his music as well, and it's salsa so like these things have been they've been sprinkling in for, they basically making a just basically a combination of things and putting a little bit of this ingredient and this in the soup. And so I think that was one of the things that they accomplished by connecting the two, salsa and the samba, together. So that was,
And I just wanted to comment on Pablo Luca. He was doing that way before anybody else was doing it. If you listen to some of his albums,
right,
he was ahead of his time.
Oh, that's for sure. In fact, I recall a conversation I had with Ruben Blades a few years ago, and he was just basically saying how samba was the absolute rage during the 60s and the late 60s and the 70s. And you said this was a rage where it was just undeniable. We had this infusion of this now unstoppable sound. Basically, it was everywhere, even mixed in with salsa and R&B and funk and soul of that era. People were just listening to samba just as much. And so when they started composing some stuff with the Fania All-Stars and everything, they started incorporating little samba breaks, especially Roberto Roena. He was a really big proponent of samba as well. So yeah, samba, I feel, has a huge impact. And with huge impact in samba, I agree with Pablo, whereas Sergio Mendes should have been featured or at least spotlighted or mentioned in some way. I do feel that they missed that opportunity there in this film.
Also, there's another person I want to mention real quick. There's an amazing percussionist who played for many years with Miles Davis and a whole bunch of people. Him and his wife were a huge influence. Is Arieto Moriera, the percussionist, and Flora Purim. And they had some amazing albums. And that was another a person that I would have kind of liked to see mentioned, because he was so mystical in his playing, and he was just an amazing person to watch. I've had the opportunity to watch Aieto several times. I actually ran into him in Cuba one time, which is kind of crazy. But
he was in Philadelphia one time, Pablo. He was in Philly one time.
I know. That's why I seen him in Philly, but then I seen him in Cuba again. So it was kind of like, wow, what are you doing here? So it's kind of cool.
Well, Latin jazz travels, doesn't it? It travels across the globe.
Yes.
Well, speaking of more traveling, we're going to travel over to the next chapter. Next episode of this film takes us to Lima, Peru, and takes on the fusion of Afro-Peruvian sounds and Latin jazz. Now, with this chapter, there were two songs offered. One was straightforward Peruvian cajon, and we all have according to our conversations prior to this, we have an affinity for the cajon and its historical context in the diaspora all over. Pablo, could you just dig into that a little bit for the audience, the viewers here?
Well, for those who don't know what a cajon is a Spanish word for box, and the box was a substitution. I know this. I was told this when I studied in Cuba. In the early 1900s, the drum was banned in Cuba, and so people were trying to find alternative methods to perform and play. So they began pulling out spoons and dresser drawers and turning the dresser drawer around, and all of a sudden they started incorporating these wooden sounds. They were banging on doors, and so these sounds actually worked their way into modern day rumba. You know, they have there's a bunch of different styles that they play the cajon with. In addition to the Peruvian way, the Afro-Cuban, they have ceremonies for the dead that they perform on the boxes. There's the very secular rumbas that they perform with the boxes now, and they incorporate the cajon with the congas. And there's another group, Osain de Monte, very modern. I brought you way up to date, and they're actually mentioned in the film as well, where they incorporate the cajons and the congas and create these polyrhythms that are amazing to study. But they're very based on guarabachangeo rhythms from the chinitos who are in Cuba, who kind of came up with this rhythms called guarabachangeo. And so these boxes have worked their way into popular music. Now, in terms of the cajon in Peru, that's a really staple instrument over there, and I was really happy to see Tony incorporate that, because I think that's part of Tony Succar's roots, and so critical. I just thought it was really well done.
Pablo, can you articulate a little bit on what's inside of that cajon? Because you see the cajon and you're playing it, but there's something inside that was added to that.
Well, typically it was just the caja, just the box, and then they realized that if they get like a bass string or a guitar string, and they nailed it to the front of the frame, it gave it that rattle, that bra. So you actually can get a low end sound from the drum, from the caja, and you can get that higher end rattle like a snare drum. So, a lot of people, Latin percussion and other percussion companies, started incorporating that technique of the string on the back in the inside of the drum, and it creates this rattle. So, yeah, there's different ones too. There's different styles of boxes. The ones, there's the ones with it and the ones without it. So.
Right.
So the cajon is indigenous to Peru and to Cuba, but in Cuba, are they known for using the quijada, which is the donkey jawbone that they use in Peruvian music? I know that for other groups within different folkloric styles, for instance, like in the Yucatan Peninsula, in the Afro-Mexican communities, they use the quijada in son jarocho, which is the Afro-Mexican style that incorporates harp and the zapateo as well. So the quijada, is that something that's used in Cuban music as well?
Not so much. The sound that usually, excuse me, the sound that usually is represented there is the shekere, which has that, they really have the gourd with the beads, which I don't have mine here at the stage. But the quija, for people who don't know what you're saying or what it is a donkey jaw. And the donkey jaw, recently, it's very difficult to get actual authentic donkey jaw. I don't know how ethical it would be to play those things in public anymore. But they have what we call the vibra slap now, so which creates the same sound. So with the little ball on the end of the metal rod, and there's a little, kind of like a triangular little box at the end that causes the rattle when you hit the ball. So that's been replaced by that replaced the donkey jaw in popular music. Now I'm sure in Peru it's still authentic and still used the same way, and that's really synonymous with their music,
Well,
Mhm.
uh, I've never seen on the Cuban music scene that instrument being used, but it's used a lot by Mexicans. They use that in a lot of their music.
Mhm. Yes, yeah, absolutely. I've seen that. I've seen the donkey jawbone actually played on stage and a tooth fly out from the bone too. So, and they know it's a bit irreplaceable at that point, but I've seen that happen.
Gotta take it back to the dentist.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah. Well, that's the first number of that Peruvian, where the Peruvian number there in the film of Roots of Latin Jazz, that they focus in on the cajon and the quijada. But the second number is actually the lando rhythm. And there's one instrument that is really prevalent throughout not just Peru, but mostly the Andean area. And that would be the traditional flute. And Jesse, as producer and event planner and musical director, I know that you know a fair share of flautists out there in the Latin jazz world.
Oh, yes, I do. I had the pleasure to meet quite a few of them, and I could start with Johnny Pacheco, who
That's right.
recently left us, and I could go on to Artie Webb, who also was one of the Fania All Stars and resided in Philadelphia. Then you have Mauricio Smith Sr., who his son right now is also following in his footsteps and playing flute. And of course, right in Philadelphia, living now is Pupi Legarreta. He was one of the Fania All Stars, and he played violin and he also played flute. And of course, my dear friend, who's no longer with us, Dave Valentine, just to name a few.
Oh,
And also,
absolutely.
you forgot to mention our another amazing. He's a dear friend of mine. I had a chance to work with him a lot. Is Nestor Torres as well.
Oh, yes, definitely, Nestor.
Didn't want Nestor to fall through the cracks. Nestor is still doing his thing, and he's in Miami, and he's killing it. So we love Nestor. So
He spent some time with you in Philadelphia working with you.
yes.
It was amazing. It was just a beautiful thing that took place.
Mhm.
I happened to catch that concert, and that was an incredible show. Absolutely. The combination of flute and percussion and the way you guys just easily just bounced off of each other's playing and just dancing between the language that you guys were giving out. It was great. And the crowd, they knew it. They knew this was a real true show. So great stuff on that.
And let me mention that Nestor is another component of. He's another person who actually incorporated. We did a couple pieces where we had joropo in it from from Venezuela. We had rumba from Cuba. He incorporates all these different styles in his music as well, in his Latin jazz. So he's a major player when it comes to the styles.
Now, Pablo, I'm going to use that right there. You just mentioned Cuba, and we're going to move on to the next chapter of this film. Next chapter, next episode, Tony Succar and Pablo Gil, they focus in on the roots of Africa in Latin jazz. And they bring in Richard Bona, the Cameroonian artist, musician himself. But they also interplay a lot of percussion from Cuba, talking about the sacred sounds of the bata drum. And the bata is prevalent in this song here. And Pablo, I know you have firsthand experience with bata drums.
Yes, I've been studying it for a while.
So how, for you, how easy or difficult, either way we can go with this, to incorporate bata into jazz?
It's not an easy thing because it's first of all there's three drums being played at the same time. There's the biggest drum called the ya, which is the mother drum who calls. Then there's the middle drum, itoteli, which responds to the ya, and then there's the okonkolo, the small drum, that keeps the timekeeper. So there's within these three drums, there's literally hundreds of rhythms that are played, and so, but there's these drums have they're two-sided heads, so you have six drums going on at the same time. One side has a sharp slap, where the other one has the open and muffled sounds, and so there's a lot of music coming out of each drum, and when you combine the three of them, it creates this voice that's very dense and very polyrhythmic, and it changes, it moves, calls and response. So it's a very difficult thing. Irakere was amazing at incorporating bata drums. They had this beautiful song which they won the Grammy called La Misa Negra. If anyone ever has a chance to check out that record, it's called La Misa Negra. Is a song that won the Grammy for Irakere and Chucho Valdez. But they incorporate the bata drums and folkloric. But let me mention that the bata drum is a Nigerian. It comes from Yoruba land, the people from Yoruba land. So it struck me a little strange to see Richard Bona, who's an amazing bassist and musician from Cameroon. The combination of I was thinking, I thought maybe they would have worked a little bit more with Cameroonian rhythms or things that were more indigenous of that area, but they went all the way across to Nigeria, incorporated some other elements, which I thought was kind of interesting. I was just trying to figure out what the tie-in was with it. So that raised a couple questions for me.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I agree with you, Pablo, because the first thing in my mind was, wait a minute, what area are we talking about? When it comes to Africa and the Yoruba religion and all this kind of stuff. So I got a little stuck on that too, Pablo.
I find that we consist as folks who really are proponents of African diaspora music. I find that we still have to come up against the monolithic image that Africa is some standalone country, as opposed to the reality that it is just millions of personalities and millions of and thousands of cultures and several languages within. And it's not just robes and drums and dance and then pyramids and wild animals. It's so much more complex than that. And I find when it comes to explain that from a music standpoint and the cultural aspect behind it, those are some of the myths we still have to dispel. But again, this is why we have this talk back. This is exactly the reason for this. We're here to educate WHYY's viewers who just saw the roots of Latin jazz. And we are some hard critics, I guess. You can't run a quick one past us, Tony and Pablo.
Well, I don't think they did. I just think I don't think it was their intent to do that. So when you create music, it's just very easy to add ingredients to it, and sometimes you choose ingredients that you might not think, peanut butter and jelly, and then put some mustard in it. Who knows? Like maybe it could have been a very creative thing that they were going for as well. So it's basically what their intent was.
Okay. Well, peanut butter and mustard is not anything I was thinking about. I mean, we're talking about the fusion of stuff, so I'm gonna go with that. I'm not necessarily appealing to the taste, but everybody has their own taste. So, but let's take that moment right there. That's the humor break there, and we're going to transfer ourselves over to the next chapter of this, the next episode within the Roots of Latin Jazz. Tony and Pablo, they take on Spain. And Spain, as we know, as the one who kind of set the Spanish language across the globe, they also had their influence in the music styles of Latin America as well. And from here, the guys, they set out to fuse jazz and bring it into the Latin jazz spectrum, and using typical traditional Spanish musical elements like flamenco. And of course, within flamenco, we know that there's more cajon, there's the Spanish guitar, and of course the dancing that accompanies it, the tapping, the percussive zapateo, dances with the feet that we always see in the finger snaps and all of that. that we have seen traditionally, and in so many other ways, that characteristic has been there. But how does it translate well over into Latin jazz? Did you find that they did it successfully?
I just want to comment real quick. You forgot the castanets.
Oh yes, the castanets, exactly. They accompany the finger snaps, exactly.
Also, there's one more element that I want to incorporate is if you notice the vocalist, there's the trovadores, and they basically there's a very distinct sound of their vocals when they perform these styles of music in Spain, and very vibrato, very árabe influence in their vocals as well. So you can really hear it with the vibrato, and I'm terrible at doing it, but I don't it's when you
No,
hear
keep
it,
going, Pablo. No, you sounded great,
no,
man. Keep going.
you're not gonna play me like that. but it's the style that accompanies those instruments as well. It's a vocal style that accompanies that's very essential in that style.
Absolutely. Yeah, the voice definitely in flamenco styles is definitely one that is just as important as much as the zapateo as well as the guitar. So that should definitely not be left out. Thank you for bringing that up, Pablo.
I have one more thing,
Go ahead.
Rashawn, and
Please.
that is the gypsies. That
Yes.
influence.
Absolutely. The Roma gypsies and everyone who, the nomadic folks who settled in the south of Spain, of course, bringing that North African, that Arabesque sound that Pablo definitely alluded to, as far as having that sound, that origin, that I find it so heartfelt and gut wrenching sometimes when flamenco singers, especially those that sing songs that are handed down from generation to generation, you can almost feel the pain and the angst in some of their singing. So I find I like that style always. I do. But again, fusing with Latin jazz, that's no easy task.
I think they did a good job personally.
Yeah. Oh, they did a good job with everything, really.
Yeah, they really did reach for a good level of quality, and I think they really accomplished that. From Spain, that chapter ends there, and it goes on to Caracas, Venezuela, which is the native home of Pablo Gil himself. Now, in Venezuela, they take on joropo, which is one of their traditional rhythms there. And for that, they bring in a lot of focus on the maracas and the cuatro guitar. They bring in Jorge
and
Glenn
the bongo.
and the bongo.
No,
That's right.
no, not bongo, bombo.
Bombo.
It's the big. It looks like a big floor tom, and it's a very high rim, and they play with a big mallet and one hand and one stick, and that's really what drives the rhythm. That's the actual, and so that drum is synonymous with that rhythm as well. Bombo.
And is that drum found in a lot of Venezuelan tambor percussion styles, or that genre?
Yeah, that's
Yes, quite a bit.
All right. I know out of Venezuela, I had the pleasure of working a few times with the incredible Betsaida Machado and her homegrown orchestra. I call it homegrown because they literally just come from home and they play in all the ceremonies, all the religious festivals that happen right down the road from them. And that's how then they just started touring the world and blowing everybody's minds. But I had the pleasure of working with her. And it's really just a tambor orchestra. And it's that singing, the singing dance, the call and response, the drum and song. And you really feel the power and you see the honesty of what is Africa and Latin America. Like this is African music when you hear it and when you hear her sing. But for this number, they focus in on that cuatro. Now, Jorge Glem is excellent musician. Has any of you gotten the chance to perform with Jorge or see him perform live?
No, not me.
No, but when you talk about cuatro, I go to one of the greatest, Yo Toro.
Oh, yes.
Unbelievable.
Now, Jesse, as far as the cuatro, can you tell me a little bit, not just about cuatro players in Latin jazz, or but also the legacy of the cuatro in tropical music? We know that it stems from there, and since Venezuela is definitely tropical, how do you feel that equates with the people? How does the sound of the cuatro really become the voice of a community?
Well, I believe that that happened as the cuatro evolved because the roots of the cuatro was just basically four strings. And if you look at a cuatro now, if I'm not mistaken, there's 12 strings on it. So it took that instrument to another level that they could be part of different orchestrations. So I think that that's why we've gone from four strings to 12 strings.
Well, but it also starts with the tres. It's not the cuatro. It's the tres and the cuatro. The tres is usually included in the beginnings of song in Cuba. They played it on the tres, which is six strings. They call it, there's two sets, three sets of two. And when you listen to song music in Cuba, coming up, that was the beginnings of song, was the tres, the maraca, the clave, and bongo, and the barimbula. So in Puerto Rico, it moved over and they incorporated two more strings or another set of strings. So there's four. That's why we call it the cuatro. Now in Venezuela, there's a whole, I'm not sure if they call it the cuatro. I think it's a smaller guitar, almost looks like a little ukulele. And it has a different feel, and it kind of mimics and works along with the rhythm of the bombo. So I'm not sure if the cuatro is the right terminology. And I think there's another name that the Venezolano brothers use.
Mhm.
It's another name for that guitar.
Well, the one thing that I know for sure is they're kind of like separated. When you say tres, immediately everybody thinks about Cuba. When you say cuatro, everybody thinks about Puerto Rico. And it's kind of like, but as you know, the Fania All Stars had the cuatro and the tres, Nelson Gonzalez, Yo Toro. And it's a beautiful combination when it's played in this orchestration similar to the Fania All Stars.
And I think Pablo Gil, definitely with Venezuela being his home, he knew how to tap into that orchestration. Of course, working along with Tony Succar, they know how to flesh that out into a big band type of approach to it as well. Now, Jesse, I'd like to take what you said about the evolution of the cuatro and I'd apply that to the evolution of Latin jazz, because in this film, The Roots of Latin Jazz, they go through all these other countries that have affected jazz and Latin music, and in their own world separately and together as well. But they take this film and they wrap it up all in Miami. And Miami, as we all know, is the unofficial capital of Latin America. So knowing that this is an American city that necessarily doesn't tap into, I guess, there's no resident culture, if you will. I think it's a combination of many cultures in one city that all descended upon Miami. However, Miami does have a musical sound. It has a musical identity, which of course, depending on who you ask, it can be in the classic soul and gospel arena. It could be in the dance and electronic music arena. But since we're focusing on Latin jazz, we can't help but focus in on the effect that tropical music has from Miami. With that said, and both of you as tropical music experts as well as jazz experts, how does Miami sit inside of your world?
Well, Miami is kind of interesting to me, because everybody that gets an opportunity to play there, they go there. And, because of the makeup of Miami and the whole fact that Gloria Estefan and her husband kind of like put Latin music on the map there, and kind of like are the ones who, are the bosses of the music. So you're going to hear everything at any time, put it that way. And it's just that's what's happened. That's what happens in Miami. Pablo probably has a little better, more on Miami, because I know you played there a few times.
Yeah, no, Miami is a melting pot. It's a melting pot. There's people from, there's large populations of many cultures there, from Jamaican to Puerto Rican to Venezolano to Cubans. There's, Haitians. When you are in Miami, you'll run into everyone there. It's just a melting pot. So along with that melting pot comes the fusion of all these cultures. And so it's very international, and it's very Caribbean down there. So, it makes total sense that they close it out in Miami. And it was nice to see Shelia E come in and play with them. The other thing I want to mention, it was really nice to see Shelia just previewing the instruments a little bit before that she did the segment, or they played the song. She played a little cajon, she played a little pandero, she just was doing it was fun to watch. I might also add, with that being said, a little kind of felt that she was reading out of the prompter a little. It was like, but she did a really wonderful job, and I'm a huge fan of Shelia, and Tony's an amazing producer and writer, and I can only salute these gentlemen, Pablo as well. This is an amazing film. I think it's an endeavor that it's a huge endeavor, because it's so much to cover. It's like almost covering the history of music in the world. Like, it's not just Latin jazz, it's folkloric music incorporating jazz harmonies and traditions into this folklore of each of these countries. And that task is immensely complicated. And I think that overall, this film serves it great justice.
I agree with you, Pablo. I also want to say that I think Shelia did a great job as a narrator, and Tony did a great job in putting this musical experience together for this episode of The Roots of Latin Jazz.
I agree. Shelia E, the perfect personality to put front and center to talk about Latin jazz. If anything, she represents, for lots of Americans of color, she represents that living fusion of music and culture. She's embodied that to the hilt, not just from her work with Prince and her own work, but also her family legacy with her father and the rest of the Escovedo family as well. So I think that was a great choice. And also, it's always great to see Shelia E play timbales. I mean, just to watch her just tear it apart is always a delight. And she still is out there leading the pack, definitely.
Right.
So I want to thank you all, gentlemen, for sitting on this. Please, Jesse, I know you got something. Go ahead.
That, to me, the Miami thing was almost like a jam session where they were intertwining various popular songs. Am I correct? How did you take it, Pablo?
Well, I wouldn't call it a jam session, because it was pretty well arranged when you have the breaks and all these. But it's definitely a jam where they get a chance to solo and profile and highlight their solo skills. I mean, Tony is an amazing arranger, and
Yep.
so I really love what he did with all his arrangements as well. So a lot of respect to Tony and to Pablo and to Shelia for this amazing contribution.
And Tony, that
ahead.
Michael Jackson transition, I thought that was great.
Yeah. And he's got a history of knowing Michael's music and translating it into Latin music as well. Definitely. Well, on that note, gentlemen, thank you so much. I'd like to thank you for joining us today for this talk back. Jesse, you have something to say?
I want to say
Please.
this because I got a little bit confused after I saw the musical experience that took place. And I got a little bit confused because in my mind, I thought that the experience would be titled The World of Latin Music and not so much the roots of Latin music, because I'm so much into roots. When somebody tells me roots, man, I go into the backyard and start digging, So that, and I'm wondering how they came about to actually, come up with that title for this episode.
Well, I hope there's a second episode, personally, another film. That way we can come back together on this and we can tackle it and dive into it just like we did here today.
Love it.
I'm sure the WHYY viewers got more than a handful of homework that they have to do today just to get up to par with all this wonderful education that they just got today. WHYY, you have just watched the talk back here with educator and producer Jesse Bermudez. He's the founder of AMLA, Asociación Músicos Latinoamericanos, and also with master percussionist and global adventurer of all music styles, the one and only Pablo Batista. My name is Rasan Lucas, creative producer and founding partner of Afro Taino. This was brought to you with a partnership between WHYY, and this was made possible by the Wincoat Foundation and the Latino Public Broadcasting. Thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy this. And by all means, go to WHYY.org for more information. Thank you and have a great day.
Thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.
We have here, currently residing in the Dominican Republic, the one and only music and culture journalist, as well as multimedia producer, Jennifer Mota Valdez. Hello, Jennifer.
Hola, Rasan. Thank you for having me.
No problem, no problem. And as we all understand from the background, I'd like to give the WHYY viewers a little hint as to why they might notice a little bit of difference this time around with this clip. It's that we had to reschedule a certain session because of weather conditions in Jennifer's homeland. So Jennifer, is everything okay on your side?
It's better now. As you mentioned, I've relocated to the Dominican Republic. It's in the Caribe. So weather conditions also affect electricity here. But I'm happy that we were able to make it work, and the WHYY team pulled through. So
excellent. We're so glad to have you a part of this. We feel your voice is very crucial to this dialogue. Thank you for participating. So for the viewers, if you hadn't heard the first time around, this is the virtual panel talkback of the film you just saw, The Roots of Latin Jazz, starring Tony Succar, Pablo Gil, and of course, host Shelia E. This event right here, this is made possible through a partnership with WHYY. And this particular event was made possible by the Wincoat Foundation and Latino Public Broadcasting. We thank them immensely. Jennifer, so we were going through some of the chapters of this episode, and the esteemed colleagues, Pablo Batista and Jesse Bermudez, had lots to weigh in on the Harlem-Cuba connection of the first episode. The first number was a Herbie Hancock standard. And I know that since New York has so many avenues of Latin music, I'd like to hear your perspective as how Latin jazz is part of that and how this legacy of Latin heritage has permeated throughout New York culture.
yeah, I mean, what I get so excited about, especially with New York City, is just how it's been like the mecca and epicenter of so many transnational and diasporic movements because of it being a melting pot of different Black communities. We have the African-American community, we have the Afro-Caribeños, Spanish language Afro-Caribbeans, and non-speaking Spanish. And through these communities, so many movements were created. Reggaeton played the movements in New York City played a huge role in reggaeton. Hip hop was created by Afro-Caribeños, salsa and the Latin jazz that came up. This was all done through the communities that were sharing that Black joy and Black resistance, you know? And when you think of like the musicians of the eras of the pioneers and the fundamental years of these movements, they worked interchangeably. We had Latin musicians working in African-American jazz bands and African-Americans playing with salsa bands. And I think it's so beautiful because it really represents like diasporic movement and community. Because as Latinos, I really feel like we tend to separate ourselves because of language, and so much of our movements were done alongside African Americans and other Black communities. And when you think of jazz itself, like such a huge fundamental part of it is the habanera rhythm, which comes from Cuba. So already we play a huge role in that also. So I look at New York as an epicenter and the mecca of like all these movements and just bringing all these communities together.
I'm in total agreement with that. As we know, Black Latinos and African Americans starting as early as the 30s and 40s, and of course, bonding together throughout the 50s as well. It definitely crossed over in cultural and community hangs, such as jazz clubs, such as job sites, such as anything where there was some sort of recognizable recreational type of events that they could really sense this is part of my diasporic lineage. I'm going to participate. I hear those drums. I'm following that. I'm going that way. And also that shared experience, of course, with the era at that time, with the social tensions of race and discrimination, of course, they have those shared traits too. But one thing I'd like to bring up, which is actually one of my favorite things about the crossover of Blacks and Latinos in New York, is one story I heard from a friend of mine many years ago. He said, you know, back then, Black folks were going to Latin parties and Latin folks were going to Black parties. Latin folks were singing doo-wop and R&B and Motown, whereas Black communities were trying to dance boogaloo and salsa and cha-cha-cha. So I always find that that's where that crossover, that's where it breaks down and starts at a party, you know? So I like that. That's just wanted to share that.
I love that.
So for this number, we're talking about the Lima, Peru chapter. Tony Succar and Pablo Gil, they do a number that's focusing on the traditional sounds of Afro-Peru. And with this one, they incorporate lots of cajon and quijada, which is a donkey jawbone. However, Jennifer, I'd like to talk to you about Peru in general, Afro-Peru and its musical trajectory. I feel right now is a very sensitive time because a lot of Afro-Peruvian artists are delving into their own music and refashioning them for modern times. Can you go a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think that, I mean, thank God for social media too, and the way information and music is being spread and the knowledge that is traveling right now. I feel like right now we're experiencing a huge wave of like Latina youth trying to reconnect and embrace a lot of their cultural traditions, and what is made to seem folkloric or like from a different time, like, oh, this is nuestra música de otro tiempo, rather than this is music that I can create now. And when we think of like, for example, like Daniel Bazan, like he's pretty much taking the blueprints or the DNA of these Afro-Peruvian movements and music styles. And rather than creating fusion, he's integrating it with different styles that he grew up with. So creating a more modernized tone that is more attractive maybe to like the younger listener, while also implementing like trap lyricism or like bars that is also very modernized. And I think with just that action alone is so exciting, because I feel like part of resistance and joy and like passing down tradition is that music is evolving, but we're still educating each other on where it's coming from. And music is such a huge part of our history and has played a central role in our survival. So the youth doing this now is passing that knowledge, passing that knowledge down, but also making it very attractive to the younger ear. And at the end of the day, it's going to spark curiosity to understand one's roots. And I think what was dope about this part is that they brought out the cajon. And you know, the drum has always been like essential to all of our movements, and in all of the Americas and the New World, in different places, I feel like the drum became a symbolize of rebellion and celebration, and people were threatened by that, whether it was soldiers, whether it was the government, whether it was slave owners, and in some parts it became banned. People were prohibited. And when you look at the different forms of drums that were created all over Latin America, it has a story and kind of like a map of that specific diaspora community story, and how that drum evolved, because musicians had to be innovative, whether it was using spoons in Cuba or creating like literally a box to still be able to do call and response movements and to still celebrate or rejoice in peace, you know, and like pass down that knowledge. And I was glad that the different drums were portrayed in the documentary, and that it was showcased, because again, the drum has always played a huge role in all of these movements. And we mentioned hip hop earlier, and I think of like Kool Herc, he's Jamaican background, and like the way he created percussion breaks, and it mimicked ancestral music also. So it's just like the drum played a huge role, and I'm glad it was included in that part too. I didn't want to go on a tangent.
No, the drum has a lot to say. It's obviously been the choice instrument throughout all time for the most part, and especially, you know, the ancestral call and the voice of it. It definitely touches somewhere deep inside of us, and I definitely appreciate it. In fact, Pablo also had some items to share about this piece as well when it comes to the cajon and the history of it throughout Cuba as well as Afro-Peru. This next chapter, which is the final chapter, this is the Miami chapter. Miami being the epicenter, the unofficial capital of Latin America. This number is the one that takes it all the way home, and we had the illustrious Shelia E, the one and only, performing alongside Tony Succar and Pablo Gil. This number has Shelia on timbales, which of course is not just one of her trademark instruments, but she is a monster on those drums. And I love seeing Shelia E perform every time. Could you tell us a little bit more about how Miami is this industrial complex that is the home of Latin music?
Yeah, and I had to add, she killed it. I loved seeing her do her thing. But yeah, and Miami has become, like you mentioned, the epicenter of Latin, especially US Latin music and Latin music business. And I think that it's become a hub for like people to move to create writing camps, to create music camps, to create albums, because of one, the environment, right? It's still in the US, but it reminds a lot of people of home. It has that warm climate. Certain areas have colorful homes. It's not like being in New York City or in Philadelphia. Those are certain things that really play a huge role in people's overall aura and how they move, and when they get into a studio, and the vibe that they feel. And then also its proximity to the Latin America, right? And the Latin community that's there. I think that what's so dope about Miami too, it's become a place, like a bridge, where we have US, Latina, and Latin Americans from different countries connecting and creating and pretty much pushing these diasporic movements, sea reggaeton, sea dembow. Like I see a lot of Dominicans that are moving there, that are now collaborating with Cubans and Puerto Ricans, and it's pushing it into directions and also collaborating with Anglo artists, with American artists, and bringing them into our music, which we're also experiencing a time where US artists, they want to hop in our songs. When 20 years ago, era como, sorry, I was going to start speaking in Spanish.
It's okay. I believe this community is very bilingual, and WHYY viewers, they know that Spanish is definitely the wave of the future. So
No, sí, tú supiste que antes there was, you know, for example, like that Latin boom people talk about, right? That energy of like, oh, I need to hop in a remix with 50, or I need to hop in a remix with an American artist in order for my music to go global. And I feel like Latin Americans are finally in a space where they're thinking in streaming numbers, and we're like, listen, we hold a huge part of the world as these different continents and regions, and not only as for language, but also diasporic rhythms. And we can be global on our own. And I think that everyone else is starting to understand that also. And Miami like symbolizes that. A lot of US artists are also going down to collaborate with reggaetoneros, and they want to collaborate with El Alfa. El Alfa has collaborated with so many American artists in less than a year that is just like, people are like, how do you do this, bro? Like, we never saw a moment like this in Latin music that was this heightened in terms of like collaborative tracks. And I think it's beautiful.
I agree wholeheartedly. I feel that Miami has this special magic in the air when it comes to Latin music artists collaborating and having an open mind to approaching different music styles and incorporating that fusion into their own artwork. For instance, I always think of major salsa artists like Victor Manuel, and then next thing you know, you'll hear your traditional salsa song, but am I hearing Bad Bunny now? Is this what I hear? And you see that there's this crossover ability to fuse sounds, but also this undercurrent mission to really spread the mission and the sound of Latin music. That comes across, that culture comes across so strong through the music, where it dominates the airwaves. And Miami has a special tinge in the air for breeding that type of magic.
It's also very festive. Like,
oh,
I
yeah.
feel like that festive atmosphere creates pop and music.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I love it. Salsa, Latin jazz, reggaeton, all of that stuff coming out of Miami. Something about it. I think the world has to thank Miami somewhere along the line for also such good music. So
Miami, babe.
305. So right now, I'd like to sign off and thank every one of our esteemed panelists for joining us today for this talk back of the film, The Roots of Latin Jazz, starring Tony Succar, Pablo Gil, and the illustrious Shelia E. I love saying illustrious for her because she just shines. I'd like to thank WHYY. I'd like to thank everybody on this panel, and we'll see you next time.